Welcome to the Littoral Zone podcast. I'm your host, Phil Rowley. The Littoral Zone, or shoal area of the lake, is a place where the majority of the action takes place. My podcast is intended to do the same, put you where the action is to help you improve your Stillwater fly fishing. On each broadcast, I, along with guests from all over the world, will be providing you with information, tips and tricks, flies, presentation techniques, along with different lakes or regions to explore. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Please feel free to email me with your Stillwater-related fly fishing questions and comments. I do my best to answer as many as we can prior to each episode, just before the main content. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's show. For close to 20 years, I've been the fly time columnist for BC Outdoors magazine. Early in my tenure, BC fly fisher Trevor Spiele introduced me to a novel fly called a balanced leech. Little did I realize how this initial introduction would shape my approach to Stillwater flies and how I fish them. In my recently released book, Tying Flies with Phil Rowley and Friends, you can find Trevor's balanced leech. I'll make sure to include a link to my book in the show notes. A balanced leech has become one of my go-to flies. If I had to choose one Stillwater fly pattern to fish with, it would probably be a balanced leech. My favorite color combination features a body of black and blue dubbing, or bruised as I call it, in combination with a gold tungsten, chartreuse tungsten, fluorescent pink tungsten, or hot orange tungsten bead. Balanced flies have performed well wherever I've had the good fortune to fish, in eastern and western Canada, across the United States, and into South America. Argentina's Lago Strobel, also known as Jurassic Lake, has rainbows that adore balanced leeches. Come to think of it, the giant cutthroat of Nevada's Pyramid Lake love balanced leeches too. Since that initial introduction, I've been fortunate enough to meet Jerry McBride, one of the pattern's originators. Jerry resides in Spokane, Washington, and is an active member of the Inland Empire Fly Fishing Club. Over the years, Jerry and I have developed a great friendship. I recall Jerry joining my group I hosted to a trip to Manitoba. Jerry provided a memorable tying demonstration featuring some of his favorite balanced flies for me and the other group members. I felt it was essential to talk to Jerry to learn how the balance concept came to be and how he ties his balanced flies. In a future episode, Jerry will provide us with his presentation techniques, equipment choices, and favorite leader setups. If you want to learn more about balanced flies, these episodes will get you on the right path. So hi Jerry, thanks for taking the time to join us today. For those of us who don't know who Jerry McBride is, I know I do, I know you do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where do you live? How long you've been fly fishing? How you got into fishing? All of that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Spokane, Washington. I went to grade school and high school here. After high school, I went down to Pullman, Washington State University, and got a degree in mechanical engineering. I met my wife there at Washington State University, and right out of school, we got married, and I went to work for my first engineering job in Beloit, Wisconsin. So we moved back there. We were there for like 5 years, then moved back to Central Washington. I worked for engineering jobs at several places in Central Washington. Eventually managed to get back to Spokane in 1975. Went to work for a company called R.E. Pearson Company as managing the engineering department. Eventually became the plant manager there. Retired in 2000. My wife and I have 2 sons. They each have 2 sons, so we have 4 grandsons. I guess that's probably kind of about it as far as, and I currently live in Spokane. I was very fortunate to be able to move back to Spokane because Spokane didn't have offer a lot of engineering jobs when I graduated, but I was very fortunate and managed to spend quite a few years there fishing with my dad. He and I were pretty much 100% fishing partners, both streams and lakes. As far as how long have I been fly fishing, I'm guessing approximately 70 years. I was very fortunate that my dad was a very avid hunter and fisherman, and he was very willing to share his knowledge and so on with me. So I went fishing and hunting with him. Plus, the other benefit was that he had a whole bunch of gear, old gear in the basement, so I could drag some of that out, and that's what I did to get started. I had a bamboo, real floppy, heavy old bamboo rod with an automatic reel, and started throwing that around. And uh, my folks had a place up at Deer Lake that my dad built. So every weekend, pretty much we were at Deer Lake. And during the summer, my stepmother and I would stay all summer. My dad would drive back and forth to work. And I guess I didn't realize how lucky I was. I thought every kid did that. But so I went swimming and fishing and rode the boat around and did all kinds of stuff. I found some fly tying equipment in the basement, a vise, real rudimentary vise and bobbin and so on, just and a little bit of materials. And so I dug that out and basically taught myself how to tie flies, how to start the thread and so on. I don't know whether there was a whip finisher there or not. I don't recall now, but I don't know if I could have taught myself how to use it. Anyway, as far as more recent times, I won the Letcher Lambeth Award. You dug yours out, so here's mine.
Yeah, we're both blessed to be winners of that because there's some pretty
Yeah.
good names on that plaque, isn't there? There's
Oh, you got yours there
yeah,
too?
I got
Oh,
mine too. It
okay.
doesn't have other award winners, but it's got me and you, so that's good, isn't it?
Well,
I think Brian Chan is on there.
Oh, yeah.
I think Harry Lemaire, and I'm
Yes.
sure I'm missing some other well-recognized Northwest fly fishers.
Yeah, I was extremely honored that I was in that kind of company that I would win an honor like that. Uh, Five of us from the Inland Empire Fly Fishing Club have won that award over the years. One guy for his paintings, the other three for rod building.
Do you know their names? Do you remember their names?
Well, let's see. Gene Lawrenson did the paintings. Um, I don't remember them right now.
Well, if they pop up, we can give them credit, but that's great. Now, you're also a member of the Inland Empire Fishing Club. You're a member, and that
Yes,
club's got a lot of history to it, doesn't it?
yes. They started in 1956, and I've been a member since 1975. So I've been a member 50 years. When I showed up in Spokane in 1975, I thought I was a pretty skookum fly fisherman. Course, part of that was I was a relatively young man. Young men kind of think pretty highly of themselves. Anyway, in short order, I realized I had a lot to learn, and which I did learn from members that had fished all over the world and were just really expert fly fishermen. I encourage people to join the fly club. You're instantly, I mean, like our club probably has got thousands of years of experience, people that are there, and people are willing to share their knowledge and so on. And anyway, I'm a big proponent of joining fly clubs.
That's how I got started. I was with the Osprey Fly Fishers. Like you had mentioned, I was young and thought I knew everything. Turns out I knew little or nothing. But just to be surrounded with those years of experience, and it's just a great learning environment, isn't it? That's all we're talking about is fly fishing, fly tying, and telling stories. It's a great atmosphere to learn in.
You learn. I mean, if you do any reading about retiring, one of the things they tell you is to have something that's a passion that you can pursue that gets you out socializing with other people and gives you something to think about that you kind of ponder. My wife is a genealogist, and that's her passion. So, in fact, she was on Zoom earlier today with her genealogy club. They were talking, I keep telling her all you guys talk about is dead people.
Yeah, we're not there yet, are we?
Anyway, she kind of it rolls her eyes at times when I spend a half hour talking with somebody about a chironomid pattern or something. So that's my comeback is that's all you guys talk about is dead people.
Now, the Inland Empire Club is also, you guys have put a book together that was big. I had early in my development, and that was the Flies of the Northwest, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And how many editions you said that had in it?
6 editions. The first edition was like a mimeographed, just a bunch of mimeograph sheets that were circulated among the club members. Fenton Ross Kelly, who is a well-known outdoors editor and was the outdoors editor for the local paper here, the Spokesman Review, kind of lent kind of a professional approach to it. And anyway, I don't think I have the first edition, but I have like second through the sixth. And it was at one time it was a real moneymaker for the club. I've gone to outdoor shows, fly fishing shows, and met people actually from all over the world that had editions of that book. We talked in more recent times about doing another edition, but as books are not very
Well, they still work. They still
fallen
work.
by the wayside, unfortunately.
They have stood the test of time. I know I've got at least 2 editions of that book. And when I was, starting out tying, that was one of the books to have if you lived in the Pacific Northwest. And me growing up in British Columbia had to have that. But it's no longer in print anymore, is it? So you'd have to find it off Amazon if you could find it. So I'll see in the show notes. I'll see if I can dig it out, look on Amazon, see if I can find it. And if I can, we'll be sure to put a link in there. So if somebody's interested in picking that book up, which, of course, you and I would highly recommend, they can do that.
Yes. Of course, your book, I think I've probably sold quite a few of them, your patterns for Stillwaters.
Yeah, that one's out of print now too. That one lasted 20 years, I think. And then, like you say, everything has a lifespan. So I guess you'd have to look for that on Amazon too. I get asked, but I have no copy. I have one copy that's mine. That's it.
Yeah, I tell people if you want to know what kind of flies to fish in this part of the world, both the Pacific Northwest and BC, that's the book to have.
No, and those flies have worked just like the flies of the Northwest. You'll find trout especially, don't seem to know any geographic borders or things like that. So if it looks like food, they'll eat it. So now we're going to talk about lake fishing today and balanced flies. But one question I got to ask you is, of course, lakes, and I know you fish rivers. Do you have a preference between the two, or are they each their own? Well, they have their own thing.
I don't know that I have a preference. It's just that I do because it's more available and so on. I fish lakes more than I do, but I fish over in Idaho. We've got 2 streams there that we fish on a regular basis for Westlope cutthroat, and I really enjoy it. That's probably the most of the time that I get a chance to fish dry flies.
Yep.
My friend that I fish with, Lee Funkhauser, he's gotten to be quite a nymph fisherman, and typically he'll catch twice as many fish as I do. I'll run through with a dry fly, and he'll come back through with a nymph and catch way more fish. And I'm not against nymph fishing, but if I get the opportunity, I'd fish a dry fly.
Well, especially for cutthroat. So, but Jerry, we got you here today because of what you contributed with the development of balanced flies. And that, personally for me, that fly has proven to be a revelation and has really changed my approach on how I fish a variety of subsurface patterns, both under indicators and not. So why don't we walk through how you came up with balanced flies, and then, of course, I think our listeners or my listeners are going to want to know how you fish them, because everybody fishes them a little differently. And I'd be interested to know your thoughts on how you like to fish them, your rods, your lines, leader setups, presentation tactics, etc. But let's circle back around and let's talk about how did you come up with this concept? What, staring at an indicator and just thinking? That's how some of mine come about.
Well, we started out fishing woolly buggers and stuff. We started out with chironomids and bionic worms, and we had the idea to fish woolly buggers. Would that work? And it did. There's a local lake here. A friend of mine and he's a real counter kind of guy. Well, he's passed away now, unfortunately, but he and I were in different boats with, other people. But one day there, a fly which I sent you, a peacock glimmer, in one day there, he caught 70 fish, and I think I pretty well matched him. I mean, we just got fish all day long on that fly. So they don't necessarily have to be balanced. However, I was kind of made me feel good that you said that you and Brian Chan actually did a test early on.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I mean, I don't know that would science stand up to scientific scrutiny.
Probably not, but it worked for us.
But well, I like the result.
Since 1972, 4-Wheel Campers has been building rugged, lightweight campers designed to fit almost any truck and every kind of adventure. Whether you're keeping it simple like me with the Project M or gearing up for full-time off-the-grid travel, there's a 4-wheel camper built to match your lifestyle. You can head over to 4wheelcampers.com right now to use the builder tool to find your perfect topper, slide-in, or flatbed camper for your next journey. Located in Boulder, Colorado, Intrepid Camp Gear is dedicated to designing and manufacturing the best and most highly engineered automotive camp gear on the market. Intrepid Camp Gear specializes in rooftop tents and aluminum cargo cases designed for skis, rods, hunting gear, and any other gear you may be hauling. Elevate your adventure with Intrepid Camp Gear right now. Head over to wetflyswing.com/intrepid right now. That's Intrepid, INTREPID, Intrepid Camp Gear.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Brian and I were doing some, when we do our schools together, we like to try and A, fish together, and B, spend a little bit of time on the water before students arrive so we have some measure of what's going on. And I was just starting to experiment with your balance fly concept, and we were both fishing the same pattern under an indicator, one balanced and one not, and the balanced version on that day certainly outfished the regular version. Now, I know when I go down to Argentina and you're fishing in 4 and 5 foot swells, I'm not so sure a balance fly may make that difference because that poor fly is just being jerked and all over the place, up and down and side to side. But I firmly believe in it. So, but you did mention this funny because you mentioned one fly there, the bionic worm, and I think it's appropriate to tell this story because I remember I can't remember what show you and I met up at. You were tying bionic worms and you gave one to me, and I got to admit I gave you a rather skeptical look because Jerry's bionic worm, marabou tail, was tied on a gold hook at the time. I think one of those bait hooks with V-rib and it was a hot pink tail and a hot orange bead. Now, that's an atypical chironomid larva color, and I freely admit I kind of went, okay, that's not terribly natural looking, but rest assured, that fly is a killer, especially when the waters are a little deeper and darker. Those fluorescent colors really stand out, and it's a must-have pattern in the chironomid section of my fly box when they're focused on chironomid larvae. That even when they'll just eat one because they see one. It's a great fly. So in addition to your balanced flies, Jerry, thanks for the bionic worm, and I'll put a link to the bionic worm in the show notes as well, so everyone out there can follow it. But let's get back to balanced flies. I just wanted to give you the credit for the bionic worm. Freely admit I was a little skeptical.
The one thing I need to say is my friend Ron Panzer is the guy that came up with that. He and I knew each other from high school. He passed away last October, but
sorry to hear.
Because I get around a lot more than him and showed people the pattern and so on, and people thought I was the one that came up with it, but I wasn't. It was my friend Ron. I still remember the first time we fished it. We were we were at Lanice Lake.
Mm-hmm.
It was my dad and I and my friend Ron and another guy by the name of Bob. And anyway, Ron, we weren't doing much of anything. So Ron said, "Hey, I tied something new," and he had four of them. So he gave each one of us one, and it was like magic. It was just unbelievable how good it worked. And I mean, we had fish jumping and carrying on. And fortunately, he and I both brought our tying stuff. We tied up some more that night and went back out. And anyway, over the years, I don't fish it as much as I used to. And I think I don't know, I feel kind of guilty about that actually. But anyway, it was like magic how well it worked.
It still is today, Jerry. So I'd recommend you pull it out again and fish with it.
Yeah, I got quite a kick out of it because my dad and I were at Chapaca, and Fenton Ross Kelly, I mentioned earlier, was there, and he wrote up a little article about my dad and I, and put it in the paper. He didn't name us or anything, but it said this father and son pair were the only ones catching any fish on a fly that doesn't resemble anything in nature, you know.
But that's a good thing sometimes, I think.
And Fenton was also the guy before that. He was poo-pooing using an indicator. He thought that was a travesty. So anyway, Dad and I show up at L Lake, and there's Ross Kelly. He's using an indicator, and he's got a bionic worm.
Your work was done.
Anyway.
All right, so let's circle back to the balanced fly.
Okay.
How did that come about?
Okay. Our flight club group has had a lunch group, mostly retired people, get together every Tuesday. In fact, I'll go tomorrow. And we've gone to a variety of restaurants over the years, but they call themselves the Liars Club. And in fact, I think maybe we've had you there.
I have been there, yes.
At the Liars Club. I don't know whether we allowed you to tell any stories or not, but
well, you know, they would have been lies. I would have fit right in.
Anyway, there was a guy by a dentist by the name of Al Cunningham, and he had been trying to come up with a balanced fly. I think a lot of people had the idea that if the fly was more like what the bug was in the water, that it made sense.
Yep.
And anyway, he gave me a bunch of little nickel-plated jig hooks that like were made for panfish, and said, "You're an engineer, figure it out." Okay, so anyway, that got me thinking about it. So the first thing I did is I tried flotation. I thought, well, I'll put a little bit of flotation on the bend of the hook, but I very quickly came to the conclusion that you would literally have to tune each and every fly that you tied to get it to set right. So then, of course, the other end, and having being an engineer and taking physics and so on, went, well, okay, go out beyond the eye on the other end and balance it that way, and it will balance whether it's in the water or in the air or whatever. And so I got some of my wife's sewing pins, and I just had brass beads, but I took and tucked some lead inside the counterbore and got it to balance. And so then I tied some on those little jig hooks. Well, they worked very well, but about a 14-inch trout would just straighten them right out.
Yep.
And the other thing that I very quickly ran into was you'd go to cast and you go, that doesn't seem right. You bring it in, well, the pin and the bead were gone. Because and what I concluded was that the thread got wet and lost tension, and so then the bead, the pin would just come out. So that's when I started. So anyway, I went to that Mustad 39. I already had some Mustad 3906, which is a really good hook. It's 3 extra strong, but a down eye type hook. And I started tying them on those and got tungsten beads and started super gluing the thread wraps. And the first patterns I tied were mostly traditional patterns like the pheasant tail nymph and the hare's ear, uh, six pack, some of those type patterns. And of course, very quickly you realize that since they run upside down, that putting like a wing pad on the inside of the hook doesn't make any sense. But what I found was that they were all of those patterns. I found patterns in books and stuff that were tied in what Joe Brooks called the in the round.
Yep.
And so that's how I tied them. It'd be kind of like a soft hackle type pattern. And of all those, that six pack worked the best. And I think it was because of the color that's used, pheasant tails treated with picric acid.
Yep.
And it gives a kind of a unique color. The problem with picric acid is that if you leave it sit around and it gets into a crystalline form, it's very sensitive to any kind of movement or anything, and it'll explode and burn your house down.
Well, that's good to know. So hopefully none of our listeners are going out right now on Amazon and buying picric acid by the truckload.
But anyway, now there are, I don't know how they do it, but they've come up with dyes that more or less replicate that color.
It's kind of a yellowish color, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of an olive yellow.
It's perfect looking color. And that, for those that don't know, the six pack, it's tied entirely with pheasant tail and pheasant rump, isn't it? The whole.
Yes.
I think I was taught it was called a self-bodied carry. I think was.
Yeah, it's a takeoff from a carry special. And anyway, of all the patterns, I would say that was the most successful in the first go around. And then I started tying more or less woolly bugger type patterns. And then I did that peacock glimmer. It's a chenille that's a mix of peacock green and black. And that's one of my go-to flies today.
Yeah.
In fact, I sent you a picture of that.
Yeah. No, we'll be sure to include that picture in the show notes as well. So you started with the down eye hook, and I did the same thing when I was first introduced to this fly. And the one problem with that is that if you're not careful, you can bury that hook eye. I always joke, you have a wonderful balanced fly, you just can't tie it on. So those are the ones you give to your friends who say, you never give me any of your fly patterns.
Yeah, well, my friend Lee, I gave him one of those, and so he stuck the tippet through and tied a fixed loop knot and cast. Well, what he didn't realize, he just went through the chenille. He didn't actually get it through the eye. So when he cast, the fly just kept right going.
So you went to jig hooks as well, right? That was the.
Pardon?
You went to a jig hook as well. Back to the jig hook.
Yeah, well, I think that was one of your. I guess in my mind, a couple of things that you contributed to this. One was the jig hook, and the other one was because of your commercial tying background, you brought some kind of measurements, kind of common sense measurements to how to tie the fly, which I thought made a lot of sense and certainly contributed. I guess that's one of the things that I would say that just about anything that we do is kind of built off of what has been done in the past. In this case, my friend Al Cunningham got me thinking about this. And then you made reference here to this Fly Tires bench side reference.
Mm-hmm. Now, you'd mentioned that to me in a previous conversation.
By Ted Leeson and Jim Scholmeyer, two big names in fly tying.
And that's a great book, isn't it? There's a lot of information in that book.
Anyway, in that book, and I think maybe it was a glass bead or something, I don't remember, but anyway, he was lashing a bead to a hook, to the shank of a hook.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I got the idea to do that. So again, like I say, these things kind of one thing builds after the other. And I would mention that your first choice on the jig hook was well, let's put it this way, the Daiichis are a lot better.
Yeah, they were. I started with another brand of hook because there wasn't a lot of small jig hooks out there to find I think the smallest I could find was a size 10, and they were designed primarily for panfish, crappie, sunfish, pretty soft mouth fish, but a trout they could straighten them out, pretty quick, especially if you're using heavier tippet. So when jig hooks became more and more popular in fly fishing, I think probably due to Euro nymphing. Now we have a whole host of long shank, short shank, big, small jig hooks at our disposal. And the reason I went to the jig hook, like you mentioned, is for no other reason than when you finish the fly, that hook eye is above the body of the fly and I can see it to tie it on. So I don't do what Lee did and think I had it tied on and threw it across the lake when it wasn't. I'm not sure, Jerry, do you get asked, people often ask me a 60 degree or a 90 degree. I always tell them it really doesn't matter. It's just that eye, when you finish the fly, is sticking up nice and visible so you can see it, so you can tie it on with the loop knots we both like to use.
Yeah, I think the 60 degree is more available than the 90s. There seemed like the 90s are kind of limited in size and so on. So, but yeah, I don't think it makes any difference. And I was quite impressed that, you were talking about using that same hook on fish at Jurassic Lake. My God.
Yeah, I've used the Daiichi 4640s, which are a bronze finish. They make a 4647 that is a black nickel, and now they've got a 4699, which is a black hook barbless, and it's got a nice round bend. The other two have kind of a limerick bend,
Right.
which holds very well, but they stood up. Those down there, the fish size is disgustingly big, I'd say 12 to 15 pounds, and you're fishing 16-pound tippet. And with a big fish like that and that kind of tippet, the weak spot becomes the hook, and it'll straighten. You can probably tell me better as a mechanical engineer why I just two big things, the tippet's not giving and the fish isn't giving, so the hook has to take the brunt of that, and it ends up bending out as well. So that's sort of why I become a big fan. But there's other good hooks out there, though, but I highly recommend those hooks. The other benefit to these flies, too, is they ride upside down, don't they? So they're
Yes.
really weedless.
I think that definitely cuts down on the time. You virtually never hook a fish in the gills.
Mm-hmm.
And, typically you hook them in the kind of the roof of their mouth or even just in their lip. So
It's very fish friendly.
and of course it's somewhat weedless.
Mm-hmm.
It'll pull through the weeds. Typically I try to fish above the weeds, but sometimes you encounter a weed, it'll slide over it rather than hang up on it.
Well, I know you design these flies to fish under indicators, but more and more I also just cast and strip them on sinking lines and a variety of lines because they're basically a little jig. So they're riding hook point up. They got that seductive pitching motion. I've used them on bass over a weedy, rocky bottom without, an indicator, and they land on their nose right on the bead and hop up, and they look like a regular bass fisherman's jig or a Ned rig, and work very well in that regard too. So they're just not an indicator fly. But you also had all the work you did. I think it's important to let everybody know you actually had an article published in Fly Tire magazine, and I remember reading it. And unfortunately, that magazine, every issue is new stuff, and not everything sadly registers all the time. But that was a great article. I know you sent me a copy of it, and I'll see if we can. You took copies of it, and I'll see if we can get that in the show notes as something for people to read, because there's some great information in there on the history and how you came up with that fly.
Yeah, it was actually I more or less developed this fly in 2003, and I thought, well, maybe I could write this is the only magazine article I ever wrote in my life. I did consult with Fenton Ross Kelly, who was a professional writer, and he helped me. Anyway, I've submitted it to Fly Tire magazine in 2004, but it didn't show up till summer of 2006. So I don't know exactly. Anyway, I did go back to the editor and I said, well, hey,
Remember me?
do I get anything? I mean, I wasn't expected to get paid,
Yeah.
but he sent me a hat.
Yeah.
So I have a Fly Tire hat.
That's ironic because my first article I ever wrote, I had made submissions to some Canadian magazines and they didn't seem interested. And then I approached Fly Tire Magazine the same way, because it was Fly Tire and American Angler. They were the same publisher. I believe they were I think it was Fly Tire. No, it was American Angler. But anyway, that was the first publication that ever took a risk on me as a writer. So we shared alumni there.
Yeah, there is a even more extensive. It was Fly of the Month for what was Federation of Fly Fishers, and I don't recall now the date on that, but there's an even more extensive write-up. The guy that was doing Fly of the Month was Bob Bates here, who was a longtime member of our fly club. He was doing that anyway, so I kind of had it in there to get it into that.
Are you an avid angler looking for the perfect fly selection? Or perhaps you've just started out fly tying? Smitty's Fly Box offers a monthly subscription service that delivers a range of flies, fly tying materials, and fishing accessories. They tailor their selections based on your fishing location, ensuring you get exactly what you need. And Smitty's isn't just any fly supplier. They've been in business for over 3 decades, delivering quality and expertise. I can personally vouch for their quality, having picked up some dry flies, and they were perfect. It's the perfect time to stock up on flies for your next adventure. Check out their offerings at smittysflybox.com. By subscribing, you're not only getting top-notch flies, but you're also supporting a small business that has had a significant contribution to the fishing community. Remember, that's smittysflybox.com, and let them know you heard about them through this podcast.
So let's go back. We talked about the bead choices, brass versus tungsten, and I think most people know that, but tungsten's twice the mass of brass, right? So it's just less of an extension needed and readily available. You started on using a common sewing pin. Has that evolved? Are you still using that today, or are you?
Well, I kind of went with the sequin pins for a while. You kind of got me going on that. But what I found was that I don't think they're long enough, and at least I had some problems with them getting bent and tearing out the thread wraps. So I've gone back to a regular sewing pin, which has a bigger head. So if you, what you'll encounter with some like 1/8-inch beads is those sequin pins, they'll pull right through.
That's true. You don't get a lot.
So anyway, I've gone back to the bigger pin and cut it to length, and I don't really have any problem. I mean, maybe once or twice a year or something, I'll cut my thread, but that really isn't a problem, where you cut the bead. And it's a much stronger pin, and I make a point of lashing it right at the 90 or 60-degree bend. I make a bunch of wraps there, and then right on almost on the end where it's cut, because those are the 2 leverage points, and then go real heavy. Then put some super glue on it.
Yeah.
And I also do a thread dam behind the bead to hold it in position, and put some super glue there also.
Yeah, I used to do that, and then I started, and I guess it's just a commercial, as you mentioned, the commercial tire in me it was just eliminating steps. So the cutting of the pin was a step, and putting the bead with the thread behind was a step too, because we're putting the beads on. I think it's important to tell people we're putting the beads on so that the wide open tapered end pushes up against that bead head and kind of envelops the pin head itself. So I was just using the body materials, the tying process to push that up, because I used to do that. I used to actually cut the pins, put the beads on, build up a thread dam behind the bead to lock it in place, and I'd kind of build them in production style. I'd cut all the pins, then I would put all the beads on and put the thread dams on, and then I would lash that assembly to the hook, and then I call that whole thing a chassis, and glue it and set it aside, and then come back when that's all dried, and then start tying the fly. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I do the whole thing on the hook. I lash the bead to the hook, and then just run up in front there and the thread dam. One thing that I wanted to mention about beads is your painted beads, like pink and orange and chartreuse and so on. They're all painted, and what will happen very quickly is the fish, their teeth chip
Yep.
the paint off.
Or my bad casting.
So what I have come up with, which works really well, is I put some super glue on there on the coat the bead with super glue. And what I do now is I build chassis just like you're talking about, and I'll super glue them and set them aside, and I kind of set them in order. So then I take the one that I did first,
Yeah.
and put it back in the vise and super glue or not super glue, UV. Did I say super glue?
Super glue, but UV resin.
UV resin
Mm-hmm.
on them. And I found that the bead paint stands up much better.
Well, that's a great tip. Do you have any bead sizes you like to use, Jerry? I tend to use like the 1/8 on the size.
Pretty much 1/8
Yeah.
is.
Because it gets heavy. They're heavy to chuck after a while. When you, I know I had some of your members out to when I used to do my trips to Manitoba, and I know you joined me out there one time, and were gracious enough to actually tie a balance fly for everyone on a less than great weather day. And I have a picture of that I use in my presentations of you sitting at the table at Arrow Lakes Lodge tying those flies. So, but I know some were using 5/16, and those are just not a fun thing to throw.
Oh yeah, I think 5/32.
Yeah, 5/32. Yeah, they're not fun to throw, and they also will slide over the pinheads sometimes as well.
Yeah, of course, if you use the bigger pin, in fact, I even have some heavier duty pins.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do, haven't done so much lately, I do what I call a Google eye type balance fly, where I take needle nose pliers and bend the pin
Mm-hmm.
at about a 45 or so, and then slide the bead on it. And so then I put 2 on there.
Oh, I see. Yep.
I think you probably had some people tell you about Rufus Woods
Yep.
on the Columbia River. And a lot of times they're fishing right next to the commercial net pens. There's a certain amount of feed that gets through.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bunch of fish on the outside of the pens hanging around. And we fish there with under indicators, about 10 foot under an indicator. And what you wanted is the fly to sink real fast because you get a fairly limited drift. Anyway, so I tied up some of those with 2 5/32 beads. And anyway, on the back cast, it had one hit me in the face. That a weld on my face for about 2 weeks afterwards. And I kind of went, I think maybe I'm going to quit doing that.
People must have thought maybe you made one too many dead person comments to your wife.
But it's like we're in like 50 feet of water there,
Yeah.
and these people that show up there to fish, with bait and so on, they go, "You guys aren't going to catch anything." Well, we catch lots of fish doing that, I can tell you.
Yeah, I've also used brads or escutcheon pins. They're called small nails, basically.
Right.
They're short though. That was the only drawback to them. They're not always easy to tie in, but the few times I've used larger beads, it was just simply finding something with a bigger head on it that the bead didn't slide over the end of the pinhead or the head of the nail in this case.
Yeah, your friend Tim Flagler, he just came out with a new pattern. It's kind of tied with squirmy wormy type. I don't know whether you've seen that one or not. It's a balanced fly. He uses, you mentioned monofilament. He melts the end and lashes and slips it in the bead. And
yeah, I've seen some people do that with like thick. I haven't played with it much, but they basically take like a thick mono, I don't know, like weed whacker cord almost, that's just thin enough to go through the bead, and then heat the end of it and turn it into a flat head, and probably epoxy or crazy glue the whole thing together. And I might try that. But Tim did feature the balance fly on his YouTube channel, so I'll make sure to link that as well, because he got introduced to balance flies when he was filming with the new Fly Fisher Television back east. I think they were fishing for smallmouth bass and were using bruised leech, and he sort of the producer of the show, Colin McEwen, he introduced Tim to those balance flies because Colin had come out and spent time with me out west when we filmed as well. So your fly's getting more and more notoriety, and rightfully so. So
yeah, well, I don't know. I guess I was just kind of pleased because that you did that test with Brian, because literally I had never I mean, it's logical, but it never actually had anybody that said they actually compared them side by side.
Yeah, we did it just for fun. Fish were in the mood to play, so that's usually a good time to do those kind of experiments. And yeah, it was just something to try because I always get asked, well, what's the big deal? What's the difference? Why do I need to do this? Does it make a difference? And I guess ultimately you can do whatever you want, but to me, it makes a difference. And, I have a lot of confidence in balanced flies, particularly balanced leeches, not only out in the Northwest, but basically everywhere I go. People, I don't know about you, but you often get asked, what fly do you start with? And mine is usually a balanced leech of some sort because I haven't met a fish yet. Walleye, bass, I've even caught pike on them, definitely trout, anything that swims likes it. I was even out fishing for false albacore off North Carolina a number of years ago, and I wish I had some with me because there's the albacore are usually pretty aggressive, chasing bait balls. It's kind of pretty exciting and pretty chaotic. But they have a phenomenon. The locals there called sipping albies, where they come up and they're almost like it's like a trout taking a spinner on the surface. It's a very delicate rise, and of course, I'm out there with Clouser minnows and things like that. And the guide said, boy, it'd be handy just hang something about like a little minnow pattern, 6 inches to a foot underneath the surface. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me that before I came? Because I have a perfect answer for that. So maybe the next time if some of my listeners get out there and chase false albacore, they can give that a try and report back to us. So
Yeah,
do you still test balance, Jerry? Or are you like
I
me?
do.
You've tied so many of them?
I do. I'll usually do, I'll do one, I just lightly lash the pin I do the thread down behind the bead, but then lightly lash the pin to the hook and take it out and put it on, piece of thread or a wire or something and I try to get it to tip the bend to be tipped up a bit.
Yeah.
And, I just do one and then I set that one aside. And then I'll go ahead and do my the rest of them, and I just bring that one up to gauge that I have the pin out where I want it, and I finish those. And then when I get all done, I take the first one and finish it off.
Yeah. You mentioned something, I think it was in your article, a teeter-totter effect. What maybe you can explain? It's probably just better explain that to the listeners. They probably can figure it out by now.
Well, I guess I was just trying to explain to people, how you're balanced. You got, maybe you got a little kid on one end and a big fat guy on the other end. Well, he's going to have to be obviously much closer to the pivot point. But I just because a lot of people, they never took physics in high school or anything, and they don't think about stuff. In fact, I kind of chuckle because I'll be out fishing with people. I've even people that were with me, and they pull the fly out of the water and they go, well, that's not balanced.
Yeah, that's important because there is a difference between what I call air balancing and then balancing in water because a fly can be in the air sitting, not in a true horizontal position, and yet you put it in the water, it goes perfectly horizontal.
Yeah, well, yeah, because the weight of the water on the materials. So anyway, they go, well, that's not balanced. I say, well, put it in the water. Yeah, okay, because it's in a neutral medium, the same as it is in the air. And that's exactly why I quit messing with foam. We have a guy in our club who's a tremendous tyer and fisherman, but he seems to seek out the most near impossible
solutions.
It's like coming up with a cure to the common cold or something. That's kind of stuff he likes to challenge. So he ties these flies with foam, and each one is like, a masterpiece.
Yeah. The thing too, I think some tires I get struggle. They're always trying for this perfectly horizontal profile in the water. And sometimes it's, I say to them, if it's not totally perfect, don't worry about it. Because under the indicator, the surface chop is going to bounce the indicator up and down. And that's going to transmit down to the fly and make it sort of dance and move. But the seductive action these balanced flies have under an indicator is, I find fish just can't help themselves. It can be a very slow day. That fly just almost tantalizes and taunts them, and eventually they sort of break down and go, oh, what the heck, and eat it, right?
Well, I enjoy a lot of your videos. You actually show a fly just hanging,
Yeah.
a conventional fly.
Yeah, it looks like an old Western off the hanging tree at the end of town.
And then you show one that's balanced. And I've got a miniature of that. I took a little plastic jar and drilled a hole in it, and then I tie a fly on a loop and put some water in there, and I put a little handle so people. And a lot of times when I'm tying, I'll have that sitting there, and they kind of go, "Well, what's this?" Well, then they pick it up and they start kind of playing. They can see how it
Yeah.
wiggles in the water.
So what are you balancing like I do? Leeches now. You mentioned nymphs like the pheasant tails, and I do calabatus nymphs. I even balance my blobs. I know you've done that as well.
Right.
Even though that some might argue, well, that's a round fly, but the reason I do it is because sometimes trout can take those flies because the materials are kind of buoyant and they like to mouth and play with them, and then they'll end up sucking them down. And I found that by fishing them balanced, that stopped. I had a more with the tungsten bead, a tighter connection on my leader. I didn't miss any because a lot of guys will fish like blobs without weight under an indicator, and that fly is it's not really tight to any leader or dropper, and I think those trout can just mouth it and suck it down their throat. I found once I started doing that, I didn't have any fish taking blobs deep anymore. They were always, as you mentioned, around the lips or in the upper part of the snout, and didn't harm them.
Yeah, I was one day I was fishing with some blobs that a friend gave me, and out of like 10 fish, 7 of them swallowed the
Yeah.
thing. And I went, the heck with it. I'm not going to fish with them anymore. It's just because I don't know whether, people say the stomach acid dissolves the hook, but I don't know whether that's true or not.
Yeah, some of them I was like, I don't know how that's going to work, but you just cut it and hope for the best, right? But you feel horrible.
Yeah, you don't have any, you look down their throat there and you can't even see the fly. It's in their stomach.
Yeah.
We had you on the phone. We discussed that, or a Zoom deal, and you mentioned going to a tungsten bead. I thought that was a good suggestion that would help. But I have probably, I don't know how many fish I've caught on a balanced blob, probably, I don't know, maybe 75 or something like that. I've actually had a couple of them swallow them even
Yeah,
in that
I
instance.
have. My trick for those is again, I fish them off a dropper a lot, and because the blob is round, the fly itself, I'm not so sure to me the balance part may not be. It kind of looks the same somewhat as it hangs there, but I use a short dropper. I use a very stiff dropper, and I often tie a clinch knot to it just so it's tight. And I really watch the indicator because I found with blobs sometimes you'll see the indicator like it's almost like a small fish is playing with it and mouthing it. And as soon as it starts to go, I strike on those. Whereas years ago, I used to wait. They'd play with it, and I'd say, okay, wait. And then boom, down it goes. Okay, now set the hook. Well, the boom is he swallowed it. Now he's swimming away and can't get it unstuck. So, yeah, they are something. There's a bit of a technique involved with there.
Yeah.
Jerry, this has been great. Just talking about the design around here. We've been close to an hour now. What I'd like to do is sort of finish up here today, and then let's have you back and talk about how you like to fish them, because I know you've got quite a way you like to fish them. So if you're okay with that, what we'd like to do is we'll sort of end it here. We talked about balanced flies, how you came up with them, the beads you use, the pin assemblies, how you like to tie them, and sort of the history behind it, and then have you back on another episode, and we'll talk about fishing them. How's that?
Okay, that sounds like a great idea.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add just to close up the fly tying? Is anything you want to mention or talk about?
Yeah, you asked a question about head turner beads.
Oh, yeah, the inverting tungsten beads. Yeah, they've become quite popular.
Certainly streamlines the process of tying the fly. And I think just tying a clinch knot there to more or less have the fly at right angles to the tippet presents the fly in a horizontal fashion, and certainly works. And the only thing I observed was that when you catch a fish, then you got to straighten that back up.
Yeah, you do have to check, because even if you're an aggressive caster, your cast can knock it out of position.
Yeah, so I've continued to just go with the balanced flies because I guess maybe I'm a little prejudiced, maybe.
Yeah, you have a little dog in the fight, as they like to say. Well, that's great, Jerry. I really want to thank you for joining me. Since I started this podcast, having you on here has been one of my bucket list items for this podcast because of, the important contribution your ingenuity made to creating balanced flies and the impact it's had on my tying and my fly fishing. And I believe on others too, because I believe a balanced fly is a common component of any Stillwater fly box today. And I also know a lot of guys, I use them, you mentioned Lee liking to nymph on your cutthroat streams. I use them when I Euro nymph. They work great under a dry dropper. They work great cast and retrieve. So they're not just an indicator Stillwater fly. They have a wide range of applications on lakes and rivers as well. So Jerry, thanks so much for your diligence and for thinking out a problem so the rest of us can benefit. I really appreciate it. So thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome.
I want to thank Jerry for taking the time to sit down and discuss with me the origins of balanced flies and how he ties them. We now know how balanced flies came to be, who introduced them, and perhaps most importantly, how to tie them properly. Be sure to check out the show notes for images and recipes of a few of the flies Jerry and I discussed. I look forward to continuing my conversation with Jerry in part 2 as we step away from the tying bench and get onto the water to learn how Jerry fishes his balanced flies. Be sure to join us.